The lightning split the sky wide open just as Delilah Watson's boots slipped on the rain-slicked rock. And for one terrifying moment, she hung suspended between earth and oblivion, with nothing but her fingertips digging into the muddy ledge above the roaring creek below. The storm had come out of nowhere that August afternoon in 1882, turning the gentle hills outside Wheatland, Wyoming, into a treacherous landscape of sliding earth and rushing water, and she had been foolish enough to think she could make it back to town before the worst of it hit. Now the wind howled around her like a living thing, tearing at her soaked dress and threatening to pry her loose from her precarious hold on the cliff face. Her arms screamed with the effort of holding on, rain streaming into her eyes and making it nearly impossible to see anything but the gray curtain of water surrounding her. She had been out collecting wildflowers for the church social when the first drops fell, thinking nothing of a little summer rain. But this was no gentle shower. This was the kind of storm that old-timers talked about in hushed voices, the kind that changed landscapes and ended lives. The path she had been following along the creek had turned into a river of mud, and when she tried to scramble up the hillside to higher ground, the earth itself had given way beneath her feet. She had tumbled backward, barely managing to catch hold of this rocky outcropping before plunging into the swollen waters 30 feet below. Her fingers were going numb. She could feel her grip weakening with each passing second, could feel the cold seeping into her bones despite the summer heat that had blessed the morning. She tried to find purchase with her feet against the cliff face, but the rock was too slick, too unstable. Every time she thought she had found a foothold, more earth would crumble away. 23 years old, and this was how it would end, alone on a mountainside with no one to even know where to look for her body. Then through the driving rain she heard something. A voice calling out, rough and urgent. She craned her neck upward, blinking against the water streaming down her face, and saw the silhouette of a man on horseback at the top of the ridge. He was shouting something she could not make out over the roar of the storm, but she saw him swing down from his saddle in one fluid motion. He tied his horse to a sturdy pine, and then he was moving toward the edge, his boots finding purchase where hers had failed. Hold on. His voice reached her now, deep and commanding. Just hold on another minute. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. What else could she do but hold on? But she saved her breath, focusing every ounce of her remaining strength on keeping her fingers locked around that ledge. She heard rocks skittering down from above and risked another glance upward. The man was climbing down toward her, moving with a confidence that seemed insane given the conditions. Rain plastered his dark hair to his head, and she could see the set of his jaw, the intense concentration in his movements. He was maybe 10 feet above her now, his boots braced against the rock face, one hand gripping an exposed root. I am going to come down next to you, he called. When I get there, I need you to grab my hand. Can you do that? I cannot let go, she gasped out, her voice barely audible. You will not have to let go of everything, just one hand. I will have you, I promise. There was something in his voice, a certainty that cut through her panic. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. She watched as he worked his way down, inch by careful inch, until he was level with her. Up close, she could see his face properly now despite the rain. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with strong features and gray eyes that locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget for a moment that she was clinging to a cliff. My name is Russell, he said, as calmly as if they were being introduced at a Sunday service. Russell Jenkins, and I am going to get you out of this. Delilah, she whispered. Delilah Watson. Well, Miss Watson, on the count of 3, you are going to reach up with your right hand and grab my wrist. I will have your wrist at the same time. Do not think about it, just do it. 1. She stared at his extended arm, at the hand reaching down toward her. He had braced himself somehow, wedged into a crevice in the rock that she had not even seen. 2. Her right hand was shaking so badly she did not know if she could make it work, but those gray eyes held hers, steady and sure. 3. She lunged upward with her right hand, releasing her death grip on the ledge. For one heart-stopping instant she was falling, and then his fingers closed around her wrist like iron bands. Her left hand slipped, losing its hold, and a scream tore from her throat as her full weight dropped onto his arm. But he did not let go. His other hand shot out and grabbed her forearm, and then he was hauling her upward with a strength that seemed impossible. "I have got you," he grunted, his muscles straining. "Get your feet against the rock. That is it. Now push up while I pull." She scrabbled against the cliff face, her boots finally finding purchase on a small ledge she had not been able to reach before. Together they worked their way upward, his hands never leaving her arms, guiding her to each handhold and foothold. The rain continued to pour down, making every movement treacherous, but he talked her through each step in that calm, steady voice. When they finally reached the top and solid ground, she collapsed onto the muddy earth, gasping for breath. Her whole body was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Russell dropped down beside her, breathing hard himself. "We need to get you out of this storm," he said, already moving. He helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist when her legs threatened to give out. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, stood exactly where he had left it, ears pinned back against the wind but otherwise calm. Russell lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. He wrapped one arm securely around her waist and gathered the reins with the other. "There is a line shack about a mile from here," he said close to her ear. "We can wait out the storm there." She could only nod, leaning back against his solid chest as he urged the horse forward. The ride seemed to take forever and no time at all. She drifted in and out of awareness, her body going into shock from the ordeal. She was vaguely aware of Russell's arm tightening around her, of his voice speaking low and reassuring near her ear, though she could not make out the words. Then they were stopping, and he was dismounting and pulling her down into his arms, carrying her toward a small wooden structure barely visible through the rain. The line shack was basic but dry. Russell kicked the door open and carried her inside, setting her gently on a rough wooden bench along one wall. The single room contained a small iron stove, a table, 2 benches, and a narrow cot in the corner. Supplies lined shelves on the far wall. Russell moved with efficient purpose, stripping off his soaked coat and then kneeling in front of the stove. Within minutes, he had a fire going, the warmth beginning to push back the chill in the room. Only then did he turn his attention fully to her. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," he said. "You are like ice." Her dress was plastered to her skin, still dripping onto the floor. She tried to reach for the buttons at her collar, but her fingers would not cooperate. They were too numb, shaking too badly. Russell saw her struggling and moved closer. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded, past the point of propriety mattering. He unbuttoned her collar and the top of her dress with careful, impersonal efficiency, then turned away and rummaged through the supplies on the shelves. He came back with a thick wool blanket and held it up like a curtain. "Can you manage the rest?" he asked, still not looking at her. "I will hold this up and turn around. There are men's clothes on the shelf. They will be too big, but they are dry." Somehow she got out of the wet dress and undergarments, her movements clumsy and slow. She found a flannel shirt and pair of work pants where he had indicated, both far too large but blissfully dry and warm. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs as best she could. "All right," she said finally, her voice hoarse. He lowered the blanket and turned around. For just a moment something flickered in those gray eyes as he looked at her, but it was gone so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. He draped the blanket around her shoulders anyway, then moved to hang her wet clothes near the stove to dry. "There is coffee," he said, "and some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a meal, but it will help." She watched him move around the small space, this stranger who had risked his life to save hers. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, she found herself really looking at him. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors. His hands were strong and capable as he measured coffee into a battered pot and set it on the stove. There was a quiet confidence to every movement, no wasted motion. "Why were you out here?" she asked finally. "In this storm?" He glanced back at her. "I was checking the herd. I work for the Double J Ranch about 5 miles north of here. We have cattle scattered all through these hills. When the storm hit, I was trying to round up a few strays and get them to lower ground." He paused. "I heard you scream. The wind carried it. I almost thought I had imagined it at first." "If you had not come," she started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "But I did come," he said simply. "So there is no point in thinking about the rest." The coffee finished brewing and he poured 2 cups, handing her one. The heat of it between her palms felt like the most wonderful thing in the world. She sipped it carefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Russell settled on the bench across from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Thunder rolled across the hills and rain hammered against the roof. But inside the small shack, with the fire crackling and the coffee warming her from the inside out, Delilah felt safer than she had in hours. She studied Russell over the rim of her cup, this man who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had not even had time to form. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did." "No thanks needed," he replied. "Any decent man would have done the same." "I am not so sure about that." She thought of the young men in town, the ones who showed up at church socials in their Sunday best, making polite conversation and eyeing her like a prize to be won. She could not imagine a single one of them climbing down a cliff face in a storm. "You could have been killed." "So could you have been," he pointed out. "Seemed only fair to share the risk." There was a hint of humor in his voice that made her lips quirk upward despite everything. "Is that cowboy logic? That is just common sense." He took a long drink of his coffee. "What were you doing out here anyway? Wheatland is a good 3 miles away." "I was collecting wildflowers," she admitted, feeling foolish now, "for the church social tomorrow." "Well, today now, I suppose, though I doubt anyone will be having a social in this weather. I thought I had plenty of time to get back before any rain started. I was wrong." "Easy mistake to make. These summer storms can come up fast." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Does anyone know where you went?" She shook her head. "I live with my aunt. She was at the general store when I left. She probably thinks I am home by now, waiting out the storm. Then she will be worried when she gets back and finds you gone." "Yes." Delilah felt a pang of guilt. Her Aunt Margaret had taken her in 5 years ago when both her parents succumbed to influenza. The older woman worried about her constantly as it was. "I did not think. I just wanted to get the flowers." "You were trying to do something nice," Russell said. "No shame in that." "The shame would be in giving up when things went wrong, but you did not do that either. You held on. Only because you told me to." "No." He met her eyes directly. "You held on before I ever got there. You kept yourself alive long enough for help to arrive. That took strength." No one had ever spoken to her quite like that before. Most men either dismissed her entirely or put her on a pedestal as if she were some delicate thing made of porcelain. Russell did neither. He spoke to her like an equal, acknowledging both her fear and her courage without making her feel weak for having felt one or strong for having shown the other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm. The warmth of the fire and the coffee and the dry clothes were bringing Delilah back to herself. The shaking had stopped, and feeling was returning to her fingers and toes, though they ached fiercely. "How long have you worked at the Double J?" she asked, wanting to know more about this man who had saved her life. "3 years now. I came up from Texas looking for work. Mr. Jameson hired me on as a hand, and I have been here ever since." He refilled both their cups from the pot. "It is good land, good people. I have been saving my pay, hoping to buy a small spread of my own someday. Your own ranch, nothing fancy. Just enough land to run a modest herd, maybe 100 head to start. Build a house, make something that is mine." There was a quiet intensity in his voice, a dream he had clearly thought about many times. But that is still a few years off. Takes time to save that kind of money on a cowboy's wages. Delilah found herself drawn in by his words, by the vision he painted. She could picture it somehow, this man building something from nothing through sheer determination. "It sounds like a good dream. What about you?" he asked. "What do you want?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her that before. Her aunt certainly had plans for her future, plans that involved marrying a respectable man and settling down to raise children and keep house. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but no one had ever asked what Delilah herself wanted. "I am not sure," she said slowly. "I work at the post office in town. I sort mail and help people with their letters. It is fine work, but it is not what I dream about at night." "So what do you dream about?" She hesitated, then decided this stranger who had risked his life for her deserved honesty. "I want to see things. Do things. My parents died when I was 18, and I came to live with my aunt. She is good to me, but Wheatland is the only place I have ever known. Sometimes I feel like I am standing still while the whole world moves around me." "Nothing wrong with wanting to see what is over the next hill," Russell said. "That is what brought me up here from Texas." "Did you find what you were looking for?" He considered that. "I found work I am proud of, land that makes me want to put down roots. That is something. But not everything." A slow smile crossed his face, transforming it. "No, Miss Watson, not everything." The way he looked at her when he said it made her heart do something strange in her chest. She told herself it was just leftover fear from her ordeal, her body still recovering from the shock. But she knew that was not quite true. There was something about Russell Jenkins that drew her in, something beyond gratitude for the rescue. The storm began to ease as the afternoon wore on into evening. The thunder grew more distant, the rain softening from a downpour to a steady patter. Russell checked outside periodically, assessing the conditions. Finally, as the sky began to lighten just a bit, he came back in and announced that they could probably make it back to town safely. "The creek will still be high," he said. "But there is a bridge about 2 miles east that should be above the flood line. We can cross there and come into Wheatland from the north." Delilah felt an unexpected reluctance to leave the small shack. Here, it had just been the two of them, outside the normal rules and expectations of society. Once they returned to town, she would be Miss Watson again, the postmaster's assistant, and he would be Russell Jenkins, just another ranch hand. Whatever this strange connection was that had formed between them in the storm might disappear like morning fog. But her aunt would be worried sick, and it would not do to compromise her reputation further by staying out all night with a man, even one who had saved her life. So she nodded and moved to gather her dress, which had dried near the fire. It was wrinkled and stained but wearable. Russell turned his back again while she changed, and if she took perhaps a moment longer than necessary to fold the borrowed clothes, Neither of them mentioned it. The ride back to town was quiet. Full darkness had fallen by the time they reached Wheatland, and lanterns glowed in windows along the main street. Russell stopped his horse in front of the post office, which sat next to the building where Delilah and her aunt lived in a small upstairs apartment. Before he could help her down, the door burst open and her Aunt Margaret came rushing out, her face a mask of relief and fear. "Delilah! Oh, thank the Lord! I have been out of my mind with worry." She reached up to pull Delilah down from the horse, holding her tight. "Where have you been? Are you hurt?" "I am fine, Aunt Margaret. I got caught in the storm, but Mr. Jenkins here rescued me." She gestured up at Russell, who had dismounted and stood holding his horse's reins. Margaret Watson looked up at the cowboy, really seeing him for the first time. "You saved her." "I helped, madam. She saved herself mostly. She is stronger than she looks." Margaret's face worked for a moment, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Then she stepped forward and took Russell's hand in both of hers. "I do not know how to thank you. She is all the family I have left in this world." "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time," Russell said. "Now I should get back to the ranch. They will be wondering where I went." "Wait," Delilah said quickly. "Will I see you again?" The question hung in the air between them. Russell looked at her for a long moment, and even in the dim light from the windows she could see something warm and questioning in his eyes. "I come into town most Saturdays," he said finally, "for supplies and such. Maybe I will see you around." "Maybe," she agreed, though they both knew it was more than maybe. He tipped his hat to both women, swung back into the saddle, and rode off down the street. Delilah watched until he disappeared into the darkness, her hand unconsciously moving to her wrist where his fingers had gripped her so tightly, keeping her from falling. "Come inside," her aunt said gently. "You need proper food and rest, and you can tell me everything that happened." Delilah allowed herself to be led inside and up the narrow stairs to their apartment. Over a late supper of cold chicken and bread, she told her aunt most of what had happened, leaving out only the strange intensity of those moments in the lined shack, the way Russell had looked at her, the questions he had asked. Some things felt too new and fragile to share, even with her aunt. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Delilah found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes she was back on that cliff, feeling her fingers slipping. Or she was in the lined shack watching Russell move through the small space with that quiet confidence. Or she was looking into his gray eyes and feeling like he saw something in her that no one else ever had. Saturday seemed impossibly far away. The next few days passed in a blur of normal activity that felt anything but normal. Delilah went to work at the post office, sorting mail and helping customers, smiling and making small talk as she always did. But her mind was elsewhere. She caught herself staring out the window at every rider who passed, wondering if it might be Russell, even though she knew it was too soon. The story of her rescue spread through town quickly, as stories did in a place as small as Wheatland. People she barely knew stopped her on the street to express their relief that she was safe, to praise Russell Jenkins for his heroism. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house went so far as to suggest that the whole town ought to present him with some kind of reward. Delilah smiled and nodded through all of it, accepting the concern and the well wishes, but inside she felt protective of what had happened, as if too much talking about it might diminish it somehow. On Wednesday, a young man named Thomas Fletcher came into the post office just before closing. Thomas worked at his father's bank and had been trying to court Delilah for the better part of a year. She had accepted his invitations to a few church socials and one town dance, but had never felt anything more than mild, friendly interest in him. "Miss Watson," he said, removing his hat. "I heard about your terrifying ordeal. I came to express my profound relief at your safety." "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. That is very kind. I also wanted to say that I hope this experience has not left you too shaken. My mother suggested that perhaps a nice dinner at our home this Sunday might help restore your spirits. She is an excellent cook." It was as close to a declaration of interest as Thomas had ever made, this invitation to his family's home. A few weeks ago, Delilah might have accepted out of politeness and vague hope that her feelings might develop with time. But now, with the memory of gray eyes and a steady voice in her mind, accepting felt dishonest. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Fletcher, but I must decline. I am still quite tired from the whole experience. Perhaps another time." His face fell slightly, but he rallied with a smile. "Of course. Another time then. Do let me know if there is anything I can do for you." After he left, Delilah's aunt emerged from the back room where she had been organizing packages. "That was uncharacteristically blunt of you." "Was it?" Delilah busied herself with straightening papers on the counter. "Thomas Fletcher is a good prospect. He comes from a respectable family. He would provide well for you, I know. But you are not interested in him." It was not quite a question. Delilah looked up to find her aunt watching her with knowing eyes. Margaret Watson might worry constantly about her niece, but she was no fool. "I like Thomas well enough," Delilah said carefully, "but I do not think I could ever love him, and I think he deserves someone who could." Her aunt was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This is about the cowboy, is it not, Russell Jenkins?" Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I barely know him." "That is not an answer." "I do not have an answer, not yet. But Aunt Margaret, when he looked at me, when he talked to me, it was different than anyone else ever has. He asked me what I wanted. No one has ever asked me that before." "And what did you tell him? The truth?" "That I want to see things, do things, that I feel like I am standing still." Margaret sighed and came to stand beside her niece, taking her hand. "You are very like your mother, you know. She had that same restless spirit when she was young, that same hunger for something more. Did she?" "You never told me that. She settled down when she married your father, found contentment in building a life with him. But yes, when she was your age, she dreamed of travel and adventure." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I only want you to be happy, Delilah, and safe. When I thought I had lost you in that storm, I felt like my heart would stop. The idea of you with some rough cowboy, living in some remote ranch miles from anywhere, it frightens me." "I do not even know if he feels the same way I do," Delilah protested. "He might not come on Saturday at all. This whole conversation might be premature." "But he did come." Delilah saw him from the post office window Saturday morning, riding down the main street on his bay gelding. Her heart jumped in her chest. She forced herself to stay behind the counter, to continue helping the customer in front of her, even though every nerve in her body was screaming at her to run outside. He did not come in right away. She saw him tie his horse outside the general store and disappear inside. Then he went to the feed and grain, then to the saloon. Each time he emerged, he glanced toward the post office, but did not approach. Was he giving her time to finish work, or was he having second thoughts? Finally, near noon, when the streets were busy with Saturday shoppers and workers, the door opened and Russell walked in. He was cleaned up from their first meeting, his hair neatly combed, his shirt and pants free of mud. But he was still unmistakably the man who had pulled her from that cliff, the same gray eyes, the same quiet confidence. "Miss Watson," he said formally, aware of her aunt watching from the back room. "I wanted to stop by and see how you are recovering from your ordeal." "I am quite well, thank you, Mr. Jenkins, and thank you again for your assistance." They were so stiffly polite, like actors in a play. But underneath the formal words there was something else, an electric awareness that made the air between them feel charged. "I wonder if you might have time to take a walk," he said. "It is a fine day, and I thought you might like to get some fresh air." "I believe I would," Delilah said, already untying her apron. She looked to her aunt, who had emerged fully from the back room now. "Aunt Margaret." Margaret looked between the two of them, clearly recognizing that this was important. "Go on," she said finally, "but be back in an hour for the lunch rush." They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, conscious of the eyes following them. Everyone in town knew by now about the rescue. They would all have opinions about the propriety of Delilah Watson walking with Russell Jenkins. Let them look, Delilah thought with a small flare of defiance. She had almost died a week ago. Life was too short to worry constantly about what other people thought. They left the main street behind, following a path that led to a small park near the edge of town. A few trees provided shade, and a bench overlooked a view of the hills beyond. "How have you been?" Russell asked once they were out of immediate earshot of others. His voice was softer now, more like it had been in the line shack. "Restless," she admitted. "Everything feels different now, but nothing has actually changed. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. When something like that happens, you cannot just go back to normal. You see things differently." "Yes." She turned to look at him fully. "I keep thinking about what you said, about my dream of seeing what is over the next hill. I have lived in this town my whole life, and I have never even been as far as Cheyenne." "Cheyenne is only about 70 miles from here," he said. "Hardly the end of the earth. For you, maybe, but for me it might as well be a different world." They reached the bench and sat down. Russell stretched his long legs out in front of him, his hat balanced on his knee. "So go, see Cheyenne, see Denver, see whatever you want to see." "It is not that simple. I have responsibilities. My aunt needs me. And young women do not just go wandering around the territory alone." "No," he agreed. "They usually need an escort, someone to keep them safe." The way he said it made her pulse quicken. She looked at him and found him already watching her, that same intensity in his eyes that she remembered from the line shack. "Are you offering to be my escort, Mr. Jenkins?" "I might be, Miss Watson, depending on the circumstances." "What circumstances did you have in mind?" He turned slightly on the bench, so he was facing her more fully. "I told you in the shack that I have been saving money to buy my own place. I have been looking at a piece of land about 40 miles northwest of here. There is a ranch house on it that needs work, and the grazing is not the best, but the price is right. I could afford it by spring if I keep saving." Delilah's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "That sounds like a fine opportunity." "It would be," he said slowly. "But a ranch is a lot of work for one person, and a house can feel mighty empty when there is no one to share it with." "I imagine so. Delilah." He said her name like it was something precious. "I know this is fast. I know we have only spent a handful of hours together. But when I was climbing down that cliff to you, when I looked into your eyes and saw your fear but also your courage, something shifted in me. And then in the shack, talking to you, I felt like I was seeing someone I had been waiting to meet my whole life." She could hardly breathe. "I felt it too," she whispered. "I am not a wealthy man. I cannot offer you the kind of comfort that someone like Thomas Fletcher could. I am just a cowboy with a dream of a small ranch and a lot of hard work ahead. But if you would be willing to take a chance on me, I promise I would spend every day trying to make you happy. I would take you to see Cheyenne and Denver and anywhere else you wanted to go. We could build something together, something that is ours." "Are you asking me to marry you, Russell Jenkins?" "I am asking if I might court you properly, with the intention of marriage if we suit. I know it is forward of me. Your aunt will probably think I am insane, proposing to court her niece a week after meeting her. But life is short, Delilah. You almost died last week. That cliff could have taken you, and I would never have known you existed. I do not want to waste time pretending I feel less than I do." Delilah thought about her life as it was, safe and predictable, standing still while the world moved around her. She thought about Thomas Fletcher and all the other young men in town, who saw her as a prize to be won rather than a person with her own dreams. And she thought about Russell, who had climbed down a cliff in a storm without hesitation, who had asked her what she wanted, who looked at her like she was both strong and beautiful at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I would very much like to be courted by you." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out after a storm. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "You have just made me the happiest man in Wyoming." "We should probably tell my aunt before the whole town knows," Delilah said, laughing a little breathlessly. "You know how gossip spreads here." "Then let's go tell her together, right now." They walked back to the post office hand in hand, and if people stared, neither of them cared. Margaret was serving a customer when they came in, but she took one look at their joined hands, and her face went through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, resignation, and finally a reluctant acceptance. Once the customer had left, Russell stood before her and formally requested permission to court her niece. To her credit, Margaret did not immediately say yes or no. Instead, she looked at Delilah. "Is this truly what you want?" she asked. "It is," Delilah said firmly. "More than I have wanted anything in a long time." Margaret sighed, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "You are very like your mother." She gave her heart quickly to your father. They had known each other barely a month before they became engaged, and everyone said it was madness. But they had 20 years of happiness together before the influenza took them. 20 years is not enough, but it is more than some people get. She looked at Russell. "Do right by her, Mr. Jenkins. She is all I have." "I will," Russell promised. "You have my word." Over the next few months, Russell and Delilah saw each other every time his work allowed. He came to town as often as he could, sometimes just for an hour or two, and Delilah lived for those visits. They took long walks together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to a cholera outbreak when he was 19 and striking out on his own. She told him about her childhood in Wheatland, about the parents she still missed every day, about her dream of seeing mountains and oceans. In October, Russell got word that the land he had been looking at was being sold to someone else. Delilah thought her heart might break, seeing the disappointment on his face, but he rallied quickly. "There will be other opportunities," he said, though she could hear the strain in his voice. "It just means waiting a little longer." But then, in December, something unexpected happened. Mr. Jameson, the owner of the Double J Ranch where Russell worked, called him into his office. The older man was planning to retire to Denver to live with his daughter, and he wanted to sell the ranch. But rather than putting it up for public sale, he offered Russell first chance at a reduced price, a reward for 3 years of loyal service. It was more land than Russell had dared to dream of, with good grazing and water rights and a solid ranch house. It was also more expensive than he could afford alone. When he came to tell Delilah about it, his excitement was tempered with frustration. "It is a gift and a curse," he said as they walked along the frozen creek, wrapped in heavy coats against the December chill. "This is a better opportunity than I ever expected, but I am still 6 months short of having enough saved." "What if you had a partner?" Delilah asked. "Someone to invest alongside you?" "I do not know anyone with that kind of money who would be willing to take a chance on me." "I do." When he looked at her in confusion, she explained. "My parents left me money when they died, not a fortune, but a decent amount. My aunt has been holding it for me, saving it for my future, For my marriage, understanding dawned on his face. Delilah, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering, but there is a condition. What condition? She stopped walking and turned to face him. The winter sun was setting, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of pink and gold. Marry me, Russell, not next year or next spring. Now. We can use the money to buy the ranch together, build our life together. Unless you think it is too soon, he laughed, and the sound was full of joy and relief. Too soon. Delilah, I have wanted to marry you since the moment you said yes to courting. I was trying to be respectable, to give you time to be sure, but if you are sure now, then I am the luckiest man alive. I am sure, she said. I have never been more sure of anything. He pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, there in the fading light with the snow crunching under their feet. It was everything their first kiss should be, tender and passionate and full of promise. They were married on a cold January morning in 1883, in the small church in Wheatland with Margaret Watson and a few close friends in attendance. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers, the same kind she had been collecting the day of the storm. Russell wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. After the ceremony, they signed the papers to purchase the Double J Ranch, which they immediately renamed the Windridge Ranch. The name came from Delilah, remembering the wind that had howled around them during the storm, the ridge where Russell had found her. It seemed fitting to name their new beginning after the day they had met. The ranch house needed work, but it was solid. They spent their first months as husband and wife fixing it up together, painting walls and mending floorboards and making it truly theirs. Russell proved to be patient and kind, teaching Delilah everything she needed to know about running a ranch. She proved to be a quick learner, unafraid of hard work. Margaret had worried about her niece living so far from town, but she need not have. Delilah threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to ride properly, not just the sedate trotting she had done around town, but real riding across open country. She helped Russell with the cattle, learned to rope and brand, even assisted with difficult births during calving season. And Russell kept his promise about helping her see the world. In the spring, they took a trip to Cheyenne, staying in a real hotel and eating in restaurants, and seeing more people in one place than Delilah had ever imagined. The next year they went to Denver, and Delilah stood amazed in front of buildings that towered 3 and 4 stories high. They went to the theater and saw a real play with actors from back east, but always they came back to Windridge Ranch, to the home they were building together. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Russell's knowledge of cattle and Delilah's head for numbers proved to be a winning combination. They expanded their herd and bought adjacent land when it became available. In the fall of 1884, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She was both excited and terrified, remembering too well how her own mother had died. But Russell was there through every moment of the pregnancy, attentive and reassuring. And when their son was born the following spring, healthy and squalling, Russell cried as he held the tiny boy for the first time. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he could walk he was following Russell around the ranch, determined to do everything his father did. Margaret came to visit as often as her duties at the post office allowed, bringing news from town and supplies they needed. She softened toward Russell as the years passed, seeing how happy he made her niece, how hard he worked to provide for his family. Sometimes Delilah would catch her aunt looking at her with satisfaction, as if she was pleased to have been proven wrong about the hasty marriage. In 1887, their daughter was born, and they named her Rose Margaret, after a flower and the aunt who had cared for Delilah when she needed it most. Rose was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, but she had a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and starvation. There were dry summers when water became precious and grass scarce. There were accidents and injuries and close calls. But through it all, Russell and Delilah faced everything together, their partnership as strong as the day they had said their vows. On summer evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills. Sometimes they talked, but often they just sat in comfortable silence, Russell's arm around Delilah's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. In those moments, Delilah would think back to that storm, to clinging to that ledge with her fingers slipping, certain she was going to die. And she would marvel at how one moment of terror had led to all of this, a life she had not even known to dream about. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked her one evening, after a particularly hard day spent dealing with a sick cow and a broken fence. "Giving up the safety of town for this?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "Do you?" "Not for a second." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you, Delilah Jenkins." "I love you too, Russell, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose proved to have a talent for painting, capturing the beauty of the Wyoming landscape in watercolors that they hung throughout the house. In 1895, they welcomed a third child, another boy they named James. Margaret lived to see all three of her great-nieces and nephews, delighting and spoiling them when she visited. She passed peacefully in her sleep in 1897, at the age of 72. They buried her in the Wheatland Cemetery, and Delilah placed wildflowers on her grave, the same kind she had been collecting the day her life changed forever. The ranch continued to prosper. Russell and Delilah became respected members of the community, known for their fairness in business and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When younger couples started out, trying to make their own way, Russell would offer advice and sometimes financial help, remembering how Mr. Jameson had given him his chance. In 1902, Thomas married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the north section of Windridge land. Delilah watched her son ride off after the wedding and felt the strange mix of pride and sadness that comes with seeing your children start their own lives. "I remember when that was us," Russell said, standing beside her. They were both in their 40s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But when he looked at her, Delilah still saw the same intensity she had seen in his eyes that day on the cliff. 20 years, she said. "Can you believe it has been 20 years since the storm? Best storm I ever lived through," he said, making her laugh. Rose moved to Denver to study art, but she came home often, and her paintings of the ranch hung in galleries throughout Colorado and Wyoming. James proved to have a talent for working with horses and started breeding and training them alongside the cattle operation. As the new century progressed, the world changed around them. Towns grew into small cities. Railroads spread across the territory. Wyoming had become a state in 1890, and Wheatland grew from a rough frontier town into an established community. But Windridge Ranch remained, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together. In the summer of 1912, Russell and Delilah celebrated their 30th anniversary with all three children and their families gathered at the ranch. There were 8 grandchildren now, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, and the house rang with laughter and noise. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Russell and Delilah walked down to the creek, following the path they had walked so many times before. The night was clear and warm, full of stars. "You remember what you said to me in the line shack?" Delilah asked. "When you asked me what I wanted." "I remember everything about that day," Russell said. "I told you I wanted to see things, do things. That I felt like I was standing still while the world moved around me." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I want you to know that you gave me all of that and more. We have built something beautiful here, Russell. We have raised 3 wonderful children. We have seen the world change. And through it all, I have never once felt like I was standing still. Every day with you has been an adventure." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, hands that had pulled her from a cliff, that had built their home, that had held their children, that had always been there when she needed them. "You were worth climbing down that cliff for," he said softly. "You were worth every risk, every hard day, every moment. You are my everything, Delilah. You always have been." They kissed there by the creek, surrounded by the land they loved under a sky full of stars. 53 years old, and they still made each other's hearts race. The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow, as years do. They lost friends to age and illness. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters. But they also saw their grandchildren grow and start their own lives. They celebrated 50th and 60th anniversaries. They grew old together, their steps slower but their hands still clasped. In the spring of 1923, at the age of 66, Russell became ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and despite the efforts of doctors brought from as far away as Cheyenne, it became clear that his lungs were failing. Delilah sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about all the things they had done together, all the memories they had made. Their children gathered and their grandchildren, filling the house one last time. Russell smiled to see them all, though the effort of breathing left him weak. On a warm May evening, with Delilah's hand in his and his children surrounding him, Russell Jenkins passed peacefully. His last words were to Delilah. "See you over the next hill, love," he whispered. "See you there," she whispered back, tears streaming down her face. But this is not where the story ends, because Delilah Watson Jenkins lived on. She continued to run the ranch with the help of her children and grandchildren, still sharp and capable even in her 70s. She traveled more, wanting to see the places she and Russell had planned to visit together. She went to California and saw the ocean for the first time, standing on the beach with the waves washing over her feet. She went to New York and saw buildings so tall they seemed to touch the sky. But she always came back to Windridge Ranch, to the home she and Russell had built. She spent her last years telling stories to her great-grandchildren, making sure they knew about the man who had climbed down a cliff in a storm, about the love that had started with one terrifying moment and lasted a lifetime. Delilah Watson Jenkins passed away peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1935, at the age of 78. She was buried next to Russell on a hill overlooking the ranch, with wildflowers growing all around. The same kind of wildflowers she had been collecting that day in 1882, when a storm changed her life forever. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the story of how it began was passed down through the years. The story of a woman clinging to a ledge in a storm, and a cowboy who climbed down to pull her to solid ground. The story of a love that was built on trust and respect and partnership, a love that lasted through 40 years of marriage and echoed through all the years that followed. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the storms rolled across the Wyoming hills, people said they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand along the creek, forever young, forever together, still building their life over the next hill.